My parents kicked me out on my 18th birthday, then told everyone they did it because I was drug addict with issues. They didn't know I had every receipt, photo, and email needed for the perfect revenge. My entire childhood can be summed up in 3 words, maybe next year. You see, my parents didn't give an F about me or my birthdays. My older sister Haley got themed birthday parties with custom inflatable castles, magicians, catered food, everything. Her sweet 16 cost more than most weddings, and my younger brother Ryan got the same treatment. But my parents avoided everything about me like the plague. I pretended like I didn't care, but deep down I did. And by the time I was 12, I stopped mentioning my birthday altogether. Something inside me just hoped that my 18th birthday would be different. Fast forward 6 years later, I woke up on the morning of my 18th birthday to party sounds. When I ran downstairs, I saw 50 guests all surrounding a 3-tier custom birthday cake with a banner. Except the banner read, "Happy 3rd birthday, Princess Bella." I froze. My name is Jordan. Bella is the dog's name. I stood there frozen while everyone sang to the dog. When the song ended, I whispered, "It's my birthday too." The room went silent. My mom's face twisted. "Are you seriously jealous of a dog on her special day?" I started crying. 18 years of being invisible just poured out. That's when my parents handed me a birthday gift. They kicked me out of their home. I had nowhere to go. Practically all of my family lived in Ireland. There was only one who lived in New York too, Uncle Dennis. We barely talked, but I figured sleeping at his place was better than the streets. I showed up at his door with a backpack, trying not to cry. He opened it, and his face was stone cold. "Let me guess, you got yourself into trouble and now you need somewhere to crash." His voice was sharp. I just nodded, too tired to explain. "You can take the basement. Don't touch anything, don't make noise, and this better be temporary." For 2 weeks, I lived like a ghost, made sure to tiptoe everywhere, and always cleaned up after myself. And other than reminding me of the rules, he barely spoke to me. Set strict rules, no visitors. I thought he hated me just like everyone else. Maybe my parents were right about him being difficult, I thought to myself. I kept my head down, followed every rule, and cried myself to sleep, wondering why nobody wanted me around. Then one night, I couldn't take it anymore. He asked about my day, and I completely broke down and told him everything. The favoritism, the emotional neglect, the getting kicked out. As soon as I was done talking, I was filled with fear for how he'd respond. And that's when Uncle Dennis said something that changed everything. "They told me you were on doctorgs, said you'd been stealing from them and got violent when they tried to help." My blood went cold. He continued, "They called me 3 weeks ago. Said if you showed up here, I needed to be firm and watch for signs of withdrawal. They said you'd lie about why you left." He pulled out his phone, showing me texts from my mother, detailed lies about my addiction and behavioral issues. "That's why I've been so harsh. I thought I was helping you get clean." We sat in silence before he spoke again. "But an addict doesn't quietly follow the rules for 2 weeks, doesn't cry themselves to sleep, doesn't flinch when I raise my voice." That's when Uncle Dennis did something unexpected. He went to his closet and pulled out a box. Inside were birthday cards, 18 of them, all addressed to me. "Your mom told me you didn't celebrate birthdays, said you had trauma around them and the family agreed not to mention it. I bought these anyway, just in case." Each card had a $50 bill inside. He'd been saving for my birthdays, believing I was too damaged to celebrate them. The anger hit me like a truck. They didn't just ignore my birthdays, they made the whole family think I couldn't handle celebrations. He promised I would be safe with him and held me while I cried myself to sleep. I didn't know it at the time, but Uncle Dennis was about to make my parents pay. My life was about to change forever. The next morning, Uncle Dennis knocked on my door earlier than usual. He carried a notebook and a steaming mug of coffee, setting both on the nightstand before sitting at the edge of my bed. "We need to document everything while it's fresh," he said, his voice steady but determined. "Every birthday they ignored, every excuse they made, every single moment they made you feel invisible." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. The idea of reliving 18 years of neglect made my stomach turn, but Dennis was already opening the notebook, clicking his pen with purpose. We spent the next 4 hours going through year by year. I started with my 5th birthday when they forgot entirely because Haley had a dance recital. Then my 8th when they promised a party, but took Ryan to an amusement park instead. By the time I reached my 13th birthday, when I found my parents eating my birthday cake in the kitchen without me, Dennis's knuckles were white from gripping the pen. "They told you what?" he asked when I mentioned my 15th birthday. I repeated how my mother said birthday parties were for children who contributed to the family. Dennis wrote faster, his handwriting becoming sharp, angry strokes across the page. When I finished, he had filled 23 pages with detailed notes, timestamps, and specific quotes I remembered. Dennis disappeared into his study and returned with 3 photo albums. "I've been keeping these since you kids were born," he said, spreading them across the coffee table. "Your parents used to email me pictures from every family event." We flipped through the pages together, and that's when I noticed the pattern. In the earliest photos, I appeared front and center with my siblings, but as the years progressed, I gradually moved to the edges of frames. By age 10, I was either in the background or cropped out entirely. "Look at this one." Dennis pointed to a Christmas photo from 5 years ago. "I have the original on my computer. They sent it to the whole family." He pulled up the file on his laptop. In the original, I stood beside the tree. In the album version, I'd been edited out completely. My phone buzzed. Mom calling. Dennis grabbed it before I could decline. "Put it on speaker," he said. "I want to hear this." "Sweetie," my mother's voice filled the room, syrupy sweet. "We need you to come home. You overreacted, and we just want to talk." "I'm not coming back," I managed to say. Her tone shifted instantly. "You need to come back before people start asking questions. The neighbors are already wondering where you you are. Let them wonder, Dennis said loudly enough for her to hear. Dennis, you keep out of this. This is between us and our daughter. The daughter you kicked out on her birthday? His voice was ice. The line went dead. An hour later, Haley showed up at Dennis's door. I watched from the window as she adjusted her designer purse and checked her reflection in her phone screen. Dennis answered, keeping the chain on. I'm here for my sister, Haley announced. Our parents sent me to bring her home. She is home, Dennis replied. Haley pushed past him when he opened the door fully. She found me in the living room and immediately launched into her speech. Look, I get it. You're upset about the dog thing, but you're being dramatic. Just come home and where would I sleep? I interrupted. Her face flushed. What do you mean? My room. Where is it? Haley shifted uncomfortably. Well, Mom needed more closet space, so they expanded my walk-in. But we can figure something. When did they do this? Like 3 weeks ago? She wouldn't meet my eyes. They donated your stuff to Goodwill, said you wouldn't need it anymore. The room spun. They'd planned this. They'd cleared out my existence before even kicking me out. Dennis stepped between us. I think you should leave. After Haley left, I remembered my college savings. Grandma had set up accounts for all 3 grandchildren when we were born. I logged into my banking app with shaking hands. The account that should have held 18 years of birthday and Christmas deposits was empty. The transaction history showed a transfer to my parents' account dated 3 days before Bella's party. Dennis immediately called his mother in Ireland. I could hear her voice through the phone, confused at first, then increasingly angry as Dennis explained. When he put her on speaker, her words made my blood run cold. They told us she joined a cult, my grandmother said. Said that's why she missed the last 5 family video calls. They said she dropped out of school and ran off with some religious group. My hands shook as I created a new social media account under a fake name. I needed to see what my family had been posting. My mother's page was full of family photos, hundreds from birthdays, vacations, holidays. In every single one from the past 8 years, I'd been edited out. But Dennis had already pulled up his computer, showing me the original versions he'd saved from old emails. I kept everything, he said. Never knew why, but something felt off about how they talked about you. 3 days later, Ryan texted asking to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I almost didn't go, but Dennis encouraged me. You need to hear what he has to say. Ryan looked nervous, constantly checking over his shoulder as he slid into the booth across from me. They've been planning this for months, he said without preamble. Haley's boyfriend lost his apartment, and Mom figured you'd be the easiest to kick out. Said you never fight back anyway. Why are you telling me this? He stared at his coffee. Because it's wrong, and because, he paused. Because I heard Mom tell Dad that once you were gone, they could tell everyone you were troubled. Mental health issues. Make it seem like your choice. That evening, my phone rang. My manager from my part-time job at the bookstore. I'm sorry, she said, but your parents called. They said you're mentally unstable and dangerous. Corporate wants me to suspend you pending an investigation. What? I've worked there for 2 years without a single complaint. I know, but they said you threatened them. They're demanding we terminate you for safety reasons. Dennis was already grabbing his car keys. We're going to the police station, now. The officer who took our report looked tired until Dennis showed him the documentation, the empty bank account, the false claims to my employer, the pattern of lies. This isn't the first time someone from your family has filed a complaint, the officer said carefully. Your parents have a history of making accusations. When we got home, I realized my birth certificate and social security card were missing from my belongings. The next day, when I tried to get replacements, the clerk informed me there was a fraud alert on my identity. Your parents filed it, she said, claiming someone was impersonating their child. That's when Mrs. Walsh reached out. My 10th grade English teacher had seen a vague post I'd made on my new social media account about starting over. Her message was simple. I've been worried about you for years. Can we talk? She arrived at Dennis's house with a thick folder. I've been documenting concerns about your home life since you were 15, she said, spreading papers across the table. You never had lunch money while your siblings bought extra meals. You wore the same clothes for days while they had designer everything. I reported it, but nothing came of it. The next mistake my parents made was posting on the community Facebook page. Please help us find our troubled daughter who needs medical attention, the post read, complete with my school photo. She's confused and refusing necessary treatment. Dennis screenshotted everything. The post was time-stamped the same day as Bella's party, the same day they kicked me out, the same day they were supposedly so concerned about my mental health that they threw a party for the dog. That night, Dennis's friend arrived. Benjamin was a family lawyer who specialized in custody and fraud cases. He reviewed everything, the documentation, the screenshots, the bank records, the false reports. This is systematic abuse, he said, and we can prove it. 2 days later, my parents showed up at Dennis's house with 2 police officers. I watched from the window as my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Our daughter is a runaway, she told them. She's only 17 and needs medical attention. Dennis met them at the door with my ID and the folder of documentation. She's 18, he said calmly, and your history of false reports is well documented. The officers reviewed the papers, exchanged glances, and turned to my parents. Ma'am, filing false reports is a crime. You need to leave. Desperate, my parents tried one last tactic. My father called Dennis the next morning. We'll unfreeze the college funds, he said. Every penny. Just have her sign a statement saying she left voluntarily and won't discuss family matters publicly. She'll think about it, Dennis lied. Instead, I spent the next 3 days compiling everything into a massive online thread. The photos showing my gradual erasure, the birthday cards Dennis had saved, Mrs. Walsh's documentation, screenshots of the lies about my mental health posted while they partied, Ryan's testimony about the premeditated eviction, the theft of my college funds, the fraud fraud alert scheme. Everything. The post exploded within our community. Dozens of people commented with their own observations. Teachers who noticed I never went on field trips my siblings attended. Parents who wondered why I wasn't at award ceremonies. Coaches who remembered my parents never coming to my games, but never missing Haley's or Ryan's. My mother's employer saw the evidence of stolen funds and lying to police. My father's company launched an investigation after seeing proof he'd participated in identity theft. Child Services contacted Dennis that afternoon. A caseworker named Victoria arrived with a thick file and serious expression. Mrs. Walsh submitted her documentation directly to our office, she explained, settling into Dennis's living room. Combined with the community response to your post, we're opening a retroactive investigation. She asked detailed questions about my childhood, taking notes as I described years of being excluded from family activities, denied basic necessities while my siblings received luxuries, and the emotional manipulation that made me believe I deserved less. Dennis provided his photo evidence, showing my systematic removal from family documentation. The bedroom situation is particularly concerning, Victoria said. Converting your living space while you still resided there shows premeditation. We'll need to interview your siblings as well. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people I'd known throughout school. A girl from my chemistry class remembered how I always made excuses for not having the required calculator, while Haley flaunted her third smartphone upgrade. My former soccer coach sent screenshots of emails where my parents claimed I'd quit the team, when actually they'd refused to pay the fees despite covering Ryan's hockey expenses. Dennis's friend Benjamin worked methodically through the legal implications. The identity theft alone is serious, he explained during our third meeting, but combined with the financial fraud and false police reports, your parents are facing real consequences. He helped me file for a restraining order, documenting each instance of harassment and false reporting. The paperwork felt overwhelming, but Benjamin guided me through each form with patience. We're also filing civil suits, he said. One for the stolen funds, another for defamation given their lies to your employer and extended family, and a third for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The restraining order hearing came quickly. My parents arrived with their own lawyer, my mother wearing pearls, and my father in his best suit. They'd clearly prepared to present themselves as concerned parents dealing with a troubled child, but Benjamin came armed with evidence. He presented the judge with the timeline Dennis and I had created, showing how my bedroom was converted weeks before my birthday. The bank records proved they'd drained my college fund days before kicking me out. The screenshots from the community Facebook page, posted the same day they'd thrown a party for the dog, demolished their claim of concern for my well-being. Your Honor, Benjamin said, this isn't a case of worried parents. This is systematic abuse designed to erase a child from a family while maintaining a public facade of normalcy. My mother tried to speak, but the judge silenced her. I've seen enough. The temporary restraining order is granted. The respondents are ordered to cease all contact with the petitioner and maintain a distance of 500 feet. Outside the courthouse, my parents' lawyer approached Benjamin. They wanted to negotiate. My clients are willing to return the college funds in exchange for dropping the criminal complaints, he offered. Benjamin didn't even blink. The criminal investigation is out of our hands. The police are pursuing charges for the false reports. As for the civil suits, we'll see them in court. The community Facebook page became a battlefield. My mother tried damage control, posting about how mental illness ran in families and how hard they'd tried to help me. But for every post she made, dozens of community members responded with their own observations and screenshots from my thread. The narrative she'd carefully crafted over years crumbled within days. My father's employer placed him on administrative leave pending their investigation. Someone from his company's HR department called Dennis's house, asking to verify the timeline of events. They were particularly interested in his participation in the identity theft, as it violated multiple company policies about ethical conduct. A week later, Ryan texted again. This time, he wanted to meet at Dennis's house. He arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. It's getting bad, he said immediately. They're turning on each other. Mom blames Dad for the fraud alert idea. Dad says Mom pushed too hard with the fake reports. He pulled out his phone, showing me videos he'd secretly recorded. My parents arguing in the kitchen, my mother screaming about how the plan was supposed to be simple, my father shouting back that she'd gotten greedy with the trust funds. In one video, I heard my mother say clearly, we should have just let her fade away like we planned. Making it dramatic was your idea. I'll testify, Ryan said quietly. Whatever you need. This isn't right. The next surprise came from Haley. She showed up at Dennis's door unannounced, but this time her designer confidence was gone. She looked smaller somehow, clutching a manila envelope. Dennis let her in warily. I need to show you something, she said, avoiding my eyes. She opened the envelope, revealing printed emails between our parents dating back 2 years. They discussed strategies for managing the Jordan problem and redistributing resources more efficiently. Where did you get these? Dennis asked. Dad's computer. He forgot I knew his password. She finally looked at me. I knew they treated you differently. I benefited from it, but I didn't know it was this calculated. She left the envelope and fled before I could respond. Reading through the emails that night made me physically sick. They'd discussed my removal like a business transaction, calculating how much they'd save on college expenses and how to redistribute my portion of Grandma's trust. Benjamin used the emails to strengthen our civil case. This shows clear conspiracy to commit fraud, he said. They can't claim it was a misunderstanding or momentary lapse in judgment. Dennis's mother called from Ireland again, this time with the entire family on speakerphone. They'd seen my post, which cousins had shared across international social media. The anger in their voices was palpable as they realized they'd been lied to for years. "We're changing the trust structure," my grandmother announced. "Your parents are being removed as trustees. Dennis will manage your funds directly." She'd already contacted her lawyer in Dublin. The extended family was united in their disgust at my parents' actions. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out with apologies for believing the lies. Aunts and uncles shared stories of how my parents had always deflected questions about my absence from family calls. My mother made one last desperate attempt at control. She showed up at the bookstore where I'd worked, causing a scene despite the restraining order. Security footage showed her telling customers I was dangerous, that they should be careful around me. She was arrested on the spot for violating the protective order. The arrest made the local news. Local woman arrested for harassment after viral post exposes years of child abuse ran in the online edition. My name was kept private, but anyone following the community Facebook drama knew the story. The article mentioned the ongoing investigations into financial fraud and identity theft. Benjamin prepared me for the civil trial. "They'll try to paint you as ungrateful," he warned. "They'll minimize their actions and maximize any teenage mistakes you made. Stay calm and stick to the facts." We practiced my testimony for hours. Dennis sat through every session, his presence a steady comfort as I rehearsed the painful details of 18 years of neglect. Benjamin had me focus on specific incidents rather than general feelings, building an undeniable pattern of abuse. The settlement conference came before the trial. My parents' assets had been frozen, their legal bills mounting. Their lawyer looked defeated as he presented their offer: full restitution of the stolen funds, plus $50,000 in damages, a public apology, and agreement to permanent no-contact orders. "It's not enough," Benjamin said flatly. "The emotional damage alone is worth more, and we haven't even addressed the defamation or lost wages from her job." The negotiations stretched for hours. My parents sat across the conference table, no longer the powerful figures from my childhood, but diminished, angry people facing the consequences of their choices. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father's jaw remained clenched throughout. Finally, their lawyer returned with a new offer: full restitution, plus $150,000 in damages, public apology in the community newspaper, and agreement to permanent restraining orders. They'd also cover all my legal fees and agree to never contest the trust restructuring. "Take it," Benjamin advised. "We could get more at trial, but this gives you closure without months of litigation." I agreed, wanting to move forward rather than remain trapped in legal battles. The settlement papers were drawn up immediately. We signed them, took the money, and the rest was history.
My psychopathic mother made my life a living hell until I moved away from her, so as revenge, she stalked me and tried to frame me for heinous crimes. It backfired on her, and she went absolutely insane in the courtroom, plus all updates. I was at a bar celebrating my 21st birthday with some friends when my mother showed up wearing a wedding dress, her hair and makeup done in bridal style. When it was finally time for the cake, she took it upon herself to blow the candles out for me and started clapping for herself. When I got out of my seat to dance with one of my friends, my mother literally shoved her away midway through the dance and started dancing with me. I pried her off, and that's when she started screaming so loud the band stopped playing. She took my ear and tried to scold me, saying I was embarrassing her on her big day. She looked around, and at that moment, I think it clicked just how big of a scene she was making. The entire bar was silently staring at her, and the bar owner physically pushed her out while she yelled, but that was far from the end. You see, there is some context needed to really understand my mother. I was not only the only boy in the family, but also the youngest, which made me a perpetual baby in my mother's eyes. My mother often tried to infantilize me growing up. She tried to spoon-feed me when I was 17, then complained I wasn't being supportive of her when I refused to let her do things like that, then gaslit me when I didn't cave to her whining. Her behavior has been manipulative and narcissistic for as long as I can remember. She tended to make everything about her. Some referred to her as having a queen mother complex. She always expected to be honored and revered on any holiday, because even my birthdays had to be all about her, even when she did none of the work or planning. She had some other habits that were unbelievably creepy. When she was 45, she started openly talking to other people near me about wanting to get a facelift and honker implants to look 20 years younger, and she'd give me the side eye while doing it. But my father adamantly said he'd never pay for such unneeded things. That sparked many fights where she called him unsupportive, then would spend weeks playing the victim. She once put me on the spot trying to infantilize me in front of an entire church, my going up with me for the holy bread and trying to feed it to me. Then when I let her telling me to chew slowly, I was 22 and I just walked out. That was the last straw, and I moved out to rent a small room at a friend's parents' house for $200 a month. When I was packing to leave, she was begging me to stay almost the entire time. I told her I was her son, not her husband, and I was sick of the way she was acting around me. I had my own life to live after all. She just ran away sobbing and we didn't talk for months. I learned from from my cousin that she was going around saying I'd come running back to her any day, but when I didn't, she lost it. My mother, even years after I became an adult, openly talked to me like a small child in front of other people and expected me to play along with it. And when I didn't, she'd first give me an expression like she was pleading with me, but I just stayed stone-faced. That made her grab me by the arm and try to drag me outside like a little kid to loudly whisper in my ear, but I always refused to let her and even threw her off a few times when she refused to let go. And the last time she attempted that, she dug her nails into my shoulder, so I swatted her hand away. That made her switch to mostly emotional manipulation. We both went to my uncle's birthday party, and while there, she was openly following me around and loudly talking to my aunt about the way I used to breastfeed as a child anytime she was close to me, and even said she lamented she couldn't still make me do that, then gave me that pleading look again. I wanted to throw up. My aunt was visibly disgusted as I'd told her about a lot of the previous things, but I guess she never really believed it was as bad as I said until that day. When I refused to cater to my mother at the party, she eventually broke down and loudly stated she was the matriarch and that what she says goes, then tried to order me to come to her, to which I reminded her that I didn't live with her anymore, nor did I have to do as she said because I wasn't a child. And then several other family members backed me up for the first time ever, which actually shocked me. That made my mother screech at us all and then leave, only to call me multiple times later to try and gaslight me over the phone. I let it all go to voicemail. Before making the choice to leave my home city, I had a girlfriend there I really liked. We'd been dating a few months and she wanted to meet my family. I was skeptical and warned her about my mother, but she must have thought I was joking. Boy, was she surprised. My mother was especially passive-aggressive towards her when they met, because she was taking her baby away, as we both heard her say to a relative over the phone in the kitchen when she thought no one else was listening. And then later, while cutting a cake she baked, my mother gave my at the time girlfriend an eerie stare while holding a large kitchen knife. Needless to say, that poor girl couldn't deal with my mother for very long, and we ended things amicably soon after, because she never wanted to risk having someone like my mother as a mother-in-law. Sadly, I had to completely agree. So when I told my mother I was moving over 1,000 miles away, she went ballistic and tried to latch onto me and say that she wouldn't allow it. But I threw her off and said she didn't have the power to stop me. I'd saved as much as I could for years and bought a truck and camper trailer and spent another 2 years living out of said camper while working a simple job in northern Cali. During this time, I didn't bother to keep in contact with any family at all. Eventually, I met someone new, and she and I are still together to this day, though neither of us are really interested in marriage or children. When I finally broke the NC with my parents in 2016, I laid down some ground rules. They were to treat me with the respect of an adult. They would not pester my girlfriend, and they would not speak to me like a child or bring up anything from my childhood. Well, no surprise, my mother couldn't do any of those when we actually came to visit for Thanksgiving. So I told her I was done, and not to bother calling me until she realized I'm a grown man. She tried to block the door and started quoting the Bible about how parents should be respected by their children. I told her she didn't respect me, so I wouldn't respect her. In December of that year, I got multiple calls, emails, and texts from her begging me to come to Christmas and not to bring my girlfriend. I said if she wasn't welcome, then neither was I. She called me unreasonable and called my girlfriend an interloping whore to our special bond, and no woman should come between a mother and her son, then practically ordered me to go. When I refused, she started making empty threats of self-harm. I told her she can do what she likes with her own body, but I would not be coming to Christmas and would instead be spending it with my girlfriend's family. My mother said I'd regret that decision and ended the call in a rage. Well, 2 days before Christmas, the door to the small house my girlfriend and I were renting was kicked in by police who were convinced that we were running a dope lab. We were detained and interrogated while police turned our yard into a veritable flea market, as a lot of our furniture and personal belongings were brought outside and arranged in rows to be inspected. They went through the house with a fine-toothed comb with sniffing dogs and found nothing more than aspirin and some medication I had at the time for depression. Needless to say, they were visibly disappointed by that. Guess they'd hoped to get some big bust or something. Turns out this all happened because my crazy mother had called them and gave details that were so accurate she had to have been stalking us at some point. She claimed that I was using my camper as a front to sell dope. My guess is she watched a lot of Breaking Bad. When police found nothing in the house, both vehicles and the camper, they were forced to put everything back and let us go. Understandably, we were furious, but I couldn't really do anything other than file a complaint because they'd caused some damage to the house that my landlord was angry about. As a major stroke of karma, my mother was arrested during her own Christmas Christmas Day party in front of most of the family. The investigation later showed that she'd taken a flight to my state and then spent a few days following us around taking pictures of me, my girlfriend, and our home. She'd broken in and photographed everything she could, right down to the underwear in my dresser. That was especially creepy. And police found she'd documented where I worked and what times my girlfriend and I were usually home or at our jobs. We're not really sure what her overall goal was, but it likely involved more than just trying to give me a scare with cops. Update. While I did press charges on my mother for stalking me and trying to frame me, I didn't want to spend much time in court because that meant being near her. So the events I'm about to describe are half from me and half from my dad. To start off with, my dad actually didn't know that my crazy mother had taken a flight to my state to stalk me. She claimed to him that she was just going to take a small vacation away from everyone for her own mental health, and never said where she was going, and my poor dad didn't know what she was about to do, or he'd have warned me. My mother then spent several days secretly following me and my GF around with her smartphone. She used the spare key we kept hidden inside of a fake rock to get into the house we were living in at the time. She then photographed everything she could. Then, after she returned home, my dad said she looked really smug about something. He described it as the kind of look someone has when they think they've won, and she seemed unusually happy and giddy until police came and arrested her on Christmas. Dad said she was bawling her eyes out and saying she didn't do anything wrong as she was being carted out by the cops. The evidence against her was clear. All of the photos were found on her phone, and my dad quickly realized what she'd done. The call my mother made to claim I was selling, she even made from her own smartphone. The call was recorded and was very much traced back to her phone quite easily. When my mother was confronted with the evidence, my dad said she just started crying and begging, and when she refused to get up from the table, the police had to move her. Dad said she just totally went limp and refused to cooperate. No one bailed her out of jail either. She had to use her own money to get herself out. Dad said she wanted to call me to beg, but I guess in a rare moment of clarity, she figured out there was no way in hell I'd bail her out after what she did. So she spent a while locked up before finally using her own money to get out. She didn't try to run. In fact, she firmly believed herself to be justified in what she'd done and felt like she could sway a judge to her point of view. Her lawyer advised she just plead guilty, so she fired him and said she'd represent herself. Well, that went about as well as you can imagine. She was in court faster than I thought, and my GF and I had to fly over to testify against my mother, but I only stayed as long as they needed me, and I was on the first flight I could get back. But while I was there, my mother seemed to stare at me almost constantly. The stares ranged from her creepy pleading look to absolute rage. When my mother took the stand, she gave a speech about why she believed she was right. I needed to be taught a lesson for refusing to come home and for putting some woman before her, because she should have been the only woman I'd ever need. She also tried to keep staring at me the entire time she was making this speech, but the judge repeatedly told her not to do that. I left before the sentencing. The judge believed my mother to be mentally unwell, but when he stated this, she went off on him, that she was completely sane. Of course, that just made her look more crazy. She said she was just a mother looking out for her son, and did what she had to do to teach me a lesson. My dad spoke up and said if she was really looking out for me, she wouldn't have tried to make her own son into her second husband, or frame me for stuff I didn't do. That made her go off on him, and guards had to keep them apart. The judge was originally going to be more lenient on my mother, but decided she needed some real time behind bars and sentenced her to 2 years in prison. When she was sentenced, my mother went full toddler and had a tantrum of pounding her fists and crying like a baby. She had to be carried out of the courtroom because she refused to cooperate again. My dad described the next 2 years without her there as being absolute bliss, and made up his mind that he'd be ready to divorce her as soon as she was out, and I mean giving her the papers on the very day she came home, and that was the same day he left that house for good. He owns an Airstream trailer and parked it at a friend's house. From there, he spent months fighting my crazy mother in the divorce. That's when more crazy shit about her came out. My dad eventually won and moved to my state with his trailer as soon as he could. While my mother was in lockup, I reconnected with my family, and they all admitted they'd known for years the way she was around me, and they were sorry about not doing anything to help, especially my father. He cried while giving me a huge apology over the phone. He filed for divorce after my mother was released from jail, and in the divorce my mother got the house, mainly because my father no longer wanted it and agreed to let her have his share in it in exchange for a clean split. The court ruled he didn't have to pay any alimony anyway, because they were already both retired, so he chose to move closer to me and now lives in the same state out of an Airstream trailer he'd already owned since the 90s along the West Coast. He said he spends his evenings sipping tea and watching watching the waves, and he couldn't be happier. My mother didn't take the divorce well and tried to draw it out, but several family members came forward with witness statements. My sisters all showed up to speak about what she was really like, and some relatives even had some recordings about the creepy things my mom used to say. On top of all that, it got out that my mother had not only cheated on my father, but done so multiple times with different men, a few of which came forward during the divorce with proof. The judge ended up refusing to let my mother draw out the divorce any longer, and even her lawyer told her to let it go if she wanted to keep her pension intact. And when it was all over, my mother has basically been left alone in the old family home, and hardly anyone wants anything to do with her anymore. She's reached out to me on several occasions, but I just told her this was the result of her own deeds, and now she'd have to live with it. She tried to say she was getting therapy, but I told her that she should have done that a long time ago, and I really didn't care anymore because she can't undo the things she'd already done. She just cried and hung up the phone. I haven't spoken to her since.
My ex-supervisor, Sophia, disappeared for 3 months after a patient died, and supporting her when she returned destroyed my life. But the dead patient had left something behind that nobody expected. I was working in the hospital when my ex-supervisor, Sophia, returned after vanishing for 3 months following a patient's death. The entire floor went dead quiet when she walked in. "There's the nurse who called a patient while high on pills," someone whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. The whole unit turned their backs on her. She was eating lunch alone in the stairwell when I decided to stop and sit down. But just before I could say anything, my manager turned the corner and pulled me up by my scrub top. "Stay away from her." She called Mrs. Brennan while high on fentanyl, but something felt wrong. Sophia's hands shook like mine did from exhaustion, nothing like the jerky movements of withdrawal. I kept sitting with Sophia during breaks, even though it made everyone treat me like I had a disease too. Doctors started ignoring my questions, and nurses whispered about me being an addict sympathizer. During morning rounds, the chief would make comments about enabling dangerous colleagues while glaring at us. My manager wrote me up for poor judgment, but I noticed things about Sophia that didn't add up. She never missed a shift. She caught medication errors others missed. The only rule she broke was slipping money to patients who couldn't afford prescriptions. But then came the night I made a mistake that almost ended my career. I was exhausted from another double and accidentally pulled the wrong medication for a cardiac patient. My hands shook as I realized I'd almost given a lethal dose. But before I could fix it, doctor, Garrett appeared behind me. "That's a serious error," he said, taking the syringe from my hand. I tried to explain, but he pressed closer. "Mistakes like this end careers, but I could forget I saw this if you're grateful." I felt his ashy hand stroke my cheek. "Get your hands off her." Sophia stood in the doorway. Garrett spun around and smiled. "The junkie's giving safety lessons now?" But Sophia had already hit the code button. "I recorded everything. Security can review the footage of you trying to blackmail her." Garrett's face went white as security arrived. The next morning, Garrett had me in the director's office claiming I'd made a near-fatal medication error, and Sophia had threatened him when he tried to report it. I tried to argue, but my voice came out as a whisper. They suspended me pending investigation and made me surrender my badge, all while Garrett watched with that predatory smile. A week later, the hospital called a mandatory safety meeting that felt more like a public execution. They made us sit in the front row while our photos appeared on screen next to the words, "medication errors." The chief was talking about us being dangerous nurses when Mrs. Brennan's daughter stood up. The whole room went quiet. She pointed at Sophia and said she called her mother while high on substances. I felt sick. Then she looked at me. "You're just as bad for defending her." That's when everyone lost it. Nurses who'd asked me for help yesterday were suddenly screaming that we were murderers. People said that I deserved to rot in hell. Sophia and I tried to leave, but Mrs. Brennan's daughter convinced them to block the exits. They crowded us and someone spit at my feet. Another nurse grabbed Sophia's badge. We had to push through all of them to get out. My whole body was shaking as we ran for the stairs. A week later, the hospital called a mandatory safety meeting, and my stomach turned when I realized they'd made this about us. The chief was talking about dangerous nurses when Mrs. Brennan's daughter stood up. The whole room went quiet. She pointed at Sophia and said she called her mother while high on substances. I felt sick because her pain was real, but the story was fake. Then she looked at me. "You're just as bad for defending her." That's when everyone lost it. People I worked with every day started yelling that we were murderers. My friend from orientation called me dangerous, all because I ate lunch with Sophia. When they finally let us leave, everyone blocked the exits. They crowded us and someone spit at my feet. Another nurse grabbed Sophia's badge. We had to push through all of them to get out. My whole body was shaking as we ran for the stairs. We reached Sophia's car in the parking garage and she collapsed against it, sobbing and shaking. I sat down and we just held each other. "You're the only one who sees I'm not a monster," she whispered. Then she showed me everything on her phone. Screenshots of Garrett threatening her for months. Computer logs showing he'd used her login while she was in the bathroom sick. Security footage proving she'd had food poisoning that night. He called Mrs. Brennan to frame me because I wouldn't sleep with him. She had recordings of him bragging about it. Evidence that he'd been planning to do the same to me. I've been collecting proof, but no one would listen until he came after you too. My heart dropped. We sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The parking garage's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I tried to process what Sophia had just shown me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Sophia wiped her face and stood up slowly. She helped me to my feet and we walked toward the exit together. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? We'd just discovered our colleague was a murderer and no one would believe us. The security guard at the exit booth barely looked up as we passed. I wondered if he'd heard about the meeting, if he thought we were killers too. My phone buzzed with messages, but I couldn't bring myself to check them. Sophia drove me to my car in the the staff lot. She pulled up next to it and turned off the engine. We sat there in silence again. Finally, she reached over and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. I got out and walked to my car. My key fob wouldn't work at first because my hands were shaking so badly. When I finally got in, I saw Sophia hadn't moved. She was just sitting there, staring straight ahead. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my mirrors, paranoid that someone was following me. Every car that got too close made my heart race. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I was drenched in sweat. My roommate was on the couch when I walked in. She took one look at me and jumped up. I must have looked terrible because she immediately asked what was wrong. I tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and confused. She made me sit down and got me a glass of water. I managed to tell her about the meeting, about Mrs. Brennan's daughter, about everyone turning on us. Her face went from concerned to horrified as I talked. When I got to the part about Garrett and what Sophia had shown me, she stood up and backed away. She looked at me like I was contagious, like whatever had happened to Sophia might happen to her if she got too close. I tried to show her some of the evidence on my phone, but she wouldn't look. She kept shaking her head and saying this was too much, that she couldn't deal with this. Then she went to her room and locked the door. I sat on the couch alone, scrolling through the screenshots and recordings Sophia had sent me. The more I looked, the sicker I felt. Garrett had been planning this for months. Every interaction, every shift we'd worked together, he'd been watching and waiting. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was an FBI agent. He said Sophia had contacted them and they needed to speak with both of us immediately. I agreed to meet them at their field office downtown. As soon as I hung up, I texted Sophia. She replied instantly that she was already on her way there. I grabbed my keys and headed back out. The FBI office was in a nondescript building downtown. I parked in a visitor spot and walked to the entrance on shaky legs. Sophia was already there, sitting in the lobby. She looked even worse than before. An agent came out and introduced himself. He led us to a small conference room with no windows. Another agent was already there with a laptop and recording equipment. They asked if we were comfortable being recorded. We both nodded. For the next 3 hours, we told them everything. They asked detailed questions about Garrett, about the hospital, about Mrs. Brennan's death. They took copies of all the evidence Sophia had collected. They seemed particularly interested in the security footage. When we finally finished, it was after 2 a.m. The agent said they would begin an investigation immediately, but warned us it could take time. They gave us their cards and said to contact them if anything else happened or if we remembered additional details. Sophia and I walked out together. The parking garage was nearly empty. Her car wouldn't start. The engine turned over a few times, then died. She tried again. Nothing. My phone was dead too. We were stuck. We sat in her car in the dark garage. Neither of us had the energy to talk. We were both exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. I kept thinking about Garrett, probably asleep in his comfortable bed while we sat here like refugees. After about 20 minutes, a security guard appeared. He knocked on the window and Sophia rolled it down. He said he was sorry, but we needed to leave. New directive from management. No loitering in the garage after hours. Sophia explained about her car, but he just shook his head. Orders were orders. He did whisper, "I'm sorry," as he walked us to the exit. His eyes said he knew who we were, knew what had happened, but rules were rules. We stood outside the building at 3 a.m. with nowhere to go. Sophia called a tow truck, but they said it would be at least 2 hours. She decided to sleep in her car until they arrived. I called an Uber even though I knew I couldn't really afford it. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror during the ride. I must have looked like I'd been through hell. When he dropped me off, he asked if I was okay. I just nodded and gave him 5 stars. I stumbled into my apartment at 4 a.m. My roommate's door was still closed, but I could see light underneath. I collapsed on my bed fully clothed and passed out immediately. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my door. My roommate was standing there with her arms crossed. She demanded to know where I'd been. When I told her about the FBI, her face went pale. She said she'd been up all night thinking and she wanted me to move out. She couldn't live with someone involved in something like this. She was sorry, but she needed to protect herself. I had 30 days to find a new place. I was too exhausted to argue. I just nodded and closed the door. My phone had charged overnight and was full of messages. Most were from coworkers asking if I was okay. A few were nastier, calling me names and saying I deserved whatever happened. Sophia texted asking if I wanted to meet for breakfast. She suggested a diner near the hospital. I agreed even though the thought of food made me nauseous. I needed to see a friendly face. I got to the diner first and grabbed a booth in the back. I ordered coffee and waited. Then I saw them. My old preceptor was there with 3 other nurses from our unit. They were at a table near the door. One of them spotted me and whispered to the others. They all turned to stare. The looks on their faces made my stomach drop. Pure disgust mixed with something like fear, like I might contaminate them just by being in the same room. Sophia walked in just then. She saw them too and froze. We made eye contact and she understood immediately. We couldn't stay here. She turned around and walked back out. I left money for the coffee and followed. We ended up at a gas station eating stale donuts in her car. She told me about her night. The tow truck had taken 4 hours to arrive. She'd gotten home at 7 a.m. to find an eviction notice on her door. Multiple complaints about late-night disturbances. Her neighbors had seen the police escort her off hospital property weeks ago when this all started. They'd been complaining to the landlord ever since. Now with everything that happened yesterday, he wanted her gone. She had 2 weeks. My phone rang. It was the FBI agent from last night. They needed us to come back in for clarification on some points. He stressed this was just preliminary assessment, not an active investigation yet. They needed more evidence before they could move forward. We drove back to the federal building together. This time we met with different agents who asked many of the same questions. They seemed skeptical about some of our claims. One kept asking if we were sure about the timeline, if maybe we were confused about certain details. After another 2 hours, they let us go with the same warnings about this being early stages. They would be in touch, maybe, if they found corroborating evidence. The agent's tone suggested he didn't expect expect to find any. When I got home, 3 bills were waiting. The ER visit from last week when the stress had given me chest pains, my student loan payment, and a notice that my health insurance would terminate in 30 days since I was no longer employed. I sat at my kitchen table doing math. Without my job, I had maybe 2 months of savings, less if I had to find a new apartment with first and last month's rent. The ER bill alone was $3,000. I felt the walls closing in. My phone buzzed. I looked and felt my blood run cold. Garrett had posted on LinkedIn about supporting mental health awareness for troubled colleagues. The post already had hundreds of likes and dozens of comments praising him for his compassion. I scrolled through the comments. Nurses, doctors, administrators, all talking about what a wonderful person he was, how we needed more healthcare providers like him, how some people just couldn't handle the stress of the job and lashed out at others. Then my mom called. My roommate had contacted her, worried about my 4 a.m. breakdown. Mom was frantic, asking what was going on, why I was mixed up in something with a murderer, what had I done. I tried to explain, but she kept interrupting. She said my roommate had told her everything, how I was defending a substance addict who called a patient, how I'd been fired for supporting a murderer, how I'd been out all night with this dangerous person doing God knows what. I tried to tell her about Garrett, about the evidence, but she wouldn't listen. She kept saying I needed to come home, to get away from that woman, to get help. When I refused, she started crying. She said I was breaking her heart. The call ended with her begging me to see reason, to apologize to the hospital, to distance myself from Sophia, to save what was left of my career. When I said no, she hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone. In less than 24 hours, I'd lost my job, my home, my friends, and now my family was turning against me, all because I'd eaten lunch with someone in a stairwell. My phone rang again. FBI. The agent sounded different this time, colder. He said the hospital was threatening to report us for theft of confidential records if we didn't retract our statements. They claimed we'd accessed files we shouldn't have. I asked about the evidence we'd provided. He said they were reviewing it, but these new allegations complicated things. If we were charged with theft, it would undermine our credibility. Maybe we should consider whether we really wanted to pursue this. After he hung up, I realized what was happening. Garrett had connections everywhere, even at the FBI. Someone had warned him we'd made a report. Now he was using the system against us. Sophia called a few minutes later. She'd gotten the same call. We both knew what this meant. We had maybe 3 months before the FBI officially declined to investigate. 3 months for Garrett to destroy us completely, and he was just getting started. The following morning, I woke to find Garrett standing in my apartment building hallway. He was carrying a medical bag and knocking on my elderly neighbor's door. My blood froze when he turned and saw me. He smiled that same predatory smile from the hospital. I fumbled with my keys trying to get back inside. He walked over slowly, deliberately. My neighbor opened her door and greeted him warmly. He explained he was making house calls now, helping seniors with their medications. She invited him in, thrilled to have such a caring doctor. He brushed past me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. The same scent from that night in the medication room. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys. He picked them up and held them out, making me take them from his hand. After he went inside, I ran to my apartment and locked the door. I texted Sophia immediately. She told me to document everything, take photos, save timestamps. We were building our own case now since the FBI wasn't helping. The hospital announced Garrett's nomination for their Patient Safety Award. The ceremony would be in 2 months. The irony made me physically ill. The man who called Mrs. Brennan was being honored for keeping patients safe. Sophia called me panicked. After leaving the hospital parking garage, security had checked her vehicle for hospital property. Now she'd found a small device attached under her car. We met at a mechanic shop where the owner confirmed it was a GPS tracker. The mechanic said it was professionally installed, the kind law enforcement used. But when we called the police, they said without proof of who put it there, they couldn't help. Sophia kept the device as evidence, though we both knew it wouldn't matter. The local medical board fast-tracked Garrett's application to become ethics committee chair. The position would give him oversight of nurse licensing and disciplinary actions. He'd have the power to destroy any healthcare worker who challenged him. My therapist called to cancel our next appointment. She said her husband worked at the hospital with Garrett, and it would be a conflict of interest to keep seeing me. She recommended someone else, but that therapist was booked for months. Another support system gone. I was grocery shopping when the process server found me. Right there between the cereal and coffee, he handed me papers. Garrett was suing me for harassment and emotional distress. He claimed I'd made repeated false accusations that damaged his reputation. The lawsuit demanded $50,000 in damages. Money I didn't have. Money I'd never have. The paper said I had 20 days to respond or face default judgment. My hands shook as I abandoned my cart and left the store. I called 3 lawyers. The first 2 declined immediately when they heard Garrett's name. The third agreed to meet but backed out after his wife threatened divorce. She worked in healthcare too and didn't want him representing those nurses. The public defender's office said they only handled criminal cases. Legal aid had a 6-month waiting list. I found one lawyer who'd take the case for a $5,000 retainer. I had $1,200 in my account. Sophia texted that she'd found a public defender who said the harassment case was defensible but risky without concrete proof. We'd have to represent ourselves. Neither of us had any legal experience, but we had no choice. The hospital posted Garrett's patient satisfaction scores publicly. He was rated the highest in his department. Patients loved him. He was charming, attentive, everything they wanted in a doctor. They had no idea what he really was. I discovered my email had been hacked when friends started asking about explicit photos. Someone had accessed my account and shared personal pictures on revenge sites. The violation felt worse than everything else. They weren't just destroying my career anymore. Sophia's sister showed up at her apartment begging her to get help. She said the whole family was worried, that Sophia needed rehab, that she was destroying her life for nothing. Sophia showed showed her the evidence, but her sister wouldn't look. Anonymous flowers appeared on Mrs. Brennan's grave with a card reading, "From your real healthcare provider." The groundskeeper said a well-dressed man had left them. Sophia and I both knew it was Garrett, claiming the victim as his own. The FBI agent assigned to our case went on vacation. His replacement called to say he knew nothing about our evidence and would need to review everything from the beginning. We'd lost 3 weeks of investigation time. Garrett published an op-ed in the local medical journal about supporting colleagues through mental health crises. He wrote about the importance of compassion when fellow healthcare workers struggled with addiction and delusions. Everyone knew he meant us. I started noticing the same car following me, a blue sedan that appeared whenever I left home. Sophia had a different car following her, a black SUV. They stayed just far enough back to avoid being obvious, but we knew they were there. Then everything changed when another nurse reached out. She'd been in therapy for months after Garrett assaulted her. She was terrified but willing to corroborate the pattern. Finally, we had another witness. But Garrett moved fast. Within days, she was committed to a psychiatric facility for suicidal ideation. Her therapist, who worked at Garrett's hospital, signed the papers. The ethics committee, which Garrett now chaired, approved the involuntary hold. Her husband blamed us. He showed up at my apartment screaming that we'd triggered her relapse, that she'd been doing better until we dragged her back into this. He said if anything happened to her, it would be our fault. My mother called again, offering to pay my legal bills if I apologized to the hospital and sought help. She'd pay for therapy, rehab, whatever I needed. All I had to do was admit I'd been wrong about Garrett and distance myself from Sophia. Rejecting her offer meant representing myself in court. It meant facing Garrett's expensive lawyers alone, but accepting meant letting him win, letting him continue hurting people. I told her no, and she cried harder than before. Sophia created fake dating profiles to match with Garrett's friends. She spent hours talking to them, gathering information. One let slip that Garrett had his own substance problem, stealing fentanyl from the hospital, but the information was obtained through deception, making it inadmissible. Hospital IT discovered Sophia had accessed Garrett's calendar through the shared system before her suspension took effect. Even though the calendar was public to all employees, they filed a formal complaint for computer trespassing. The prosecutor's office said they were considering misdemeanor charges. I found Sophia living in a storage unit. Her friend had moved abroad but kept paying rent on the unit. Sophia had set up a sleeping bag between boxes of the friend's belongings. She showered at a truck stop and charged her phone at the library. The storage facility had rules against people living there, but Sophia was careful. She only entered after dark and left before the office opened. She said it was better than her car, warmer and safer. I brought her food and blankets. Garrett announced his new relationship at a hospital fundraiser. His girlfriend worked at the FBI field office. Sophia and I realized she was probably the one who'd warned him about our report. The connections ran deeper than we'd thought. The fundraiser honored Mrs. Brennan's memory. Garrett gave the keynote speech about patient safety and the importance of compassionate care. Sophia and I watched the live stream as he cried, talking about colleagues who betrayed patient trust. Living in the storage unit, Sophia developed a respiratory infection. The dust and cold made her cough constantly. She couldn't see a doctor without insurance, couldn't get antibiotics without a prescription. I bought over-the-counter medications, but they barely helped. My father texted that my mother was in the hospital. The stress I'd caused had triggered a cardiac event. He said I needed to come immediately, that she might not make it. The guilt crushed me, even though I knew it was manipulation. I left Sophia sick in the storage unit and drove to the hospital. My mother was sitting up in bed, surrounded by family. It had been an anxiety attack, not a heart attack, but they'd all gathered to stage an intervention. They took turns telling me how my choices were destroying the family, how my mother couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function knowing what I'd become. They begged me to get help, to admit I'd been manipulated by a substance addict. While I was at the hospital, the storage facility manager noticed someone had been living in Sophia's unit. He called the police. She was arrested for trespassing and theft of services. The bail was set at $5,000. I sold my car to a dealer for far less than it was worth. I pawned my grandmother's jewelry, my laptop, anything valuable. I still came up $3,000 short. Sophia would have to stay in jail until the trial. Cleaning out my desk, I found my training notes from when I'd started at the hospital. Mrs. Brennan had asked me to help her with the computer system. She'd written her password on a sticky note, her grandson's birthday. I still remembered it. I accessed her hospital email from a library computer. What I found changed everything. She'd been documenting Garrett's harassment for months. Email after email describing his advances, his threats, his abuse of power. She'd been building a case. The emails showed she'd stayed quiet to protect her pension. She was 1 year from retirement, couldn't afford to lose her benefits. She'd planned to report him after she retired when she was safe, but Garrett found out. The final email, sent the night before she died, was to her daughter. She wrote that she'd witnessed something terrible, that Dr. Garrett had done something to another nurse. She was going to report it in the morning. She never got the chance. I realized Mrs. Brennan had seen Garrett assault Sophia. That's why he called her. She wasn't just a random victim to frame Sophia. She was a witness who had to be silenced. The pieces finally fit together. I needed to tell Mrs. Brennan's daughter, but I couldn't approach her directly. She hated us, blamed us for dishonoring her mother's memory. So I waited outside her grandson's school, knowing she picked him up every day. When she arrived, I pretended to be another parent. We made small talk about the school, the weather, anything but the hospital. Slowly, carefully, I mentioned that I'd found some old emails that might interest her. She was suspicious, but curious. I showed her one email on my phone, her mother talking about the grandson's birthday. Her face changed. She recognized her mother's writing style, her way of expressing love. She agreed to look at more. We sat in her car as she read through everything. Her mother's fear, her documentation, her final message. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the truth. Her mother had been murdered for trying to protect another nurse. She said she couldn't testify testify against a respected doctor. Couldn't put her family through that, but she took copies of everything. She said she needed time to think, to process what she'd learned. It was more than I'd hoped for. The pre-trial hearing for Garrett's harassment suit became local news. His supporters packed the courtroom. Nurses, doctors, administrators, all there to support the heroic physician being persecuted by disgruntled former employees. Garrett's lawyer presented my old social media posts from nursing school, posts about anxiety, depression, struggling with the pressure. He painted a picture of an unstable person who'd fixated on an innocent doctor. The judge seemed to buy it. The judge said there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. He also mentioned that my behavior showed a pattern that could warrant additional charges. I could face criminal harassment charges on top of the civil suit. Sophia's nephew was removed from her sister's custody. Child Protective Services said the association with a criminal element made the home unsafe. Her sister blamed Sophia for destroying their family. Another relationship severed. The nursing board extended my license suspension indefinitely pending the outcome of the criminal case. Even if I won, even if we proved everything, I might never work as a nurse again. Everything I'd worked for was gone. The FBI finally responded to our follow-ups. They had concerns about the case but needed a state-level conviction before they could act. Federal investigation was contingent on local authorities taking action first. We were trapped in bureaucratic hell. Desperate, we contacted a journalist who'd covered hospital corruption before. She was interested but needed documented proof, not just testimony. She said accusations without evidence would just lead to defamation suits. We decided to break into the hospital after hours. The security footage from the night Mrs. Brennan died might still exist. Garrett didn't know about the older cameras in the medication room, the ones that backed up to a separate system. I still had my access code to the building. We entered through the emergency exit at 3 a.m. The hospital was eerily quiet. Every shadow looked like security. Every sound made our hearts race. We made it to the IT office. Sophia accessed the backup system while I watched the door. She found the footage from that night. There was Garrett entering Mrs. Brennan's room at 2:47 a.m. He stayed for 12 minutes. The timestamp matched the death certificate. We copied everything to a flash drive. We had him. We finally had concrete proof that he'd been in her room when she died. But as we tried to leave, security appeared. Someone had seen us on the newer cameras. They called the police. We were arrested for breaking and entering, burglary, and theft of property. The flash drive was confiscated as evidence of our crime, not his. Our proof was now locked in an evidence room. We faced 1 to 2 years in prison for the burglary alone. The prosecutor offered a deal. Drop the accusations against Garrett and get probation. Keep pursuing him and face the full charges. We had 72 hours to decide. Mrs. Brennan's daughter found her mother's journal while packing up her things. Hidden in a recipe box between instructions for apple pie and pot roast were handwritten notes about Garrett. Her mother had documented everything. The journal entries were devastating. Garrett had threatened to make her another OD statistic if she reported him. He described exactly how he'd do it, how no one would question an elderly patient dying. He'd done this before. A reporter at Garrett's previous hospital started investigating his departure after seeing our story in the news. She found discrepancies in his references, suggestions of problems that had been covered up. A pattern was emerging. The state attorney visited us in jail with a final offer. Drop everything, plead to misdemeanors, get probation and time served, or go to trial, risk years in prison, destroy what was left of our lives. The choice seemed impossible, but we both knew what Mrs. Brennan would want. She'd been building a case against him. She'd died trying to protect others. We couldn't let her sacrifice be for nothing. We rejected the plea deal. The decision meant we'd face trial for burglary while trying to prove Garrett was a killer. Our public defender was overwhelmed and underprepared. Garrett had the hospital's full legal team. The odds were stacked against us. But something had shifted. Mrs. Brennan's daughter had started talking to other families. The journalist was digging deeper. The second nurse's husband had questions about his wife's sudden commitment. Cracks were forming in Garrett's perfect facade. We sat in our separate cells, awaiting trial. Sophia was sick and getting sicker without proper medical care. I'd lost everything. My career, my family, my freedom. But we had the truth. And sometimes, that has to be enough. The preliminary hearings would start soon. Garrett would testify about being stalked and harassed. We'd have to defend ourselves while exposing him. It seemed impossible, but we'd come too far to give up now. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than expected. I sat in the defendant's chair wearing borrowed clothes that didn't fit right. Sophia sat beside me, her skin pale from weeks in jail. The courtroom filled with Garrett's supporters who glared at us like we were the real criminals. Garrett took the stand first. He described months of harassment, how we'd stalked him at work, spread malicious rumors, tried to destroy his career out of jealousy. His voice cracked at all the right moments. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Our public defender stumbled through cross-examination. His questions were unfocused, repetitive. During the lunch recess, I saw him at a bar down the street, ordering his third drink. When court resumed, he could barely stand straight. The judge denied our motion for a mistrial. We'd have to continue with a hammered lawyer or represent ourselves. Sophia and I exchanged glances and made the decision. We'd handle our own defense. Sophia took the stand despite her worsening infection. She coughed between answers, her voice hoarse and weak. She explained about the evidence we'd collected, the threats, the GPS tracker. The prosecutor objected to everything as hearsay. Then something unexpected happened. Garrett's girlfriend from the FBI took the stand for the prosecution, but under cross-examination, she accidentally admitted she'd warned Garrett about our report. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. The judge ordered an immediate investigation into the FBI breach but refused to halt the trial. We'd gotten lucky with one slip, but it wasn't enough. We needed more than procedural violations to prove murder. Mrs. Brennan's daughter sat in the gallery clutching a worn recipe box. During a recess, she approached the prosecutor and handed over her mother's journal. She'd found it hidden between recipes. keys. Her mother's final attempt to document the truth. The prosecutor read through the pages, his face growing pale. He immediately moved to enter the journal as evidence. Garrett's lawyers objected, claiming it was prejudicial and unverified. The judge called for a handwriting expert. The expert confirmed what we already knew. Every word was Mrs. Brennan's. The journal detailed months of harassment, threats, and fear. One entry described Garrett promising her a peaceful exit if she stayed quiet about what she'd witnessed. The most damaging entry was dated the night before she died. She'd seen Garrett corner Sophia in the medication room. She'd watched him assault her. She planned to report it in the morning. Consequences be damned. Garrett returned to the stand. The prosecutor confronted him with the journal entries. His composure started cracking. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried to explain away each accusation. Then he made a mistake. When asked about Mrs. Brennan's death, he started rambling about the pressure of healthcare, how some patients needed help finding peace, how people didn't understand the burden of making those decisions. The prosecutor cut him off immediately and moved to treat him as a hostile witness. Garrett's lawyer objected frantically. The judge called a recess to consider. We could see the panic in Garrett's eyes as court officers escorted him out. When court resumed, the judge allowed the hostile witness designation. The prosecutor's questions became sharper, more aggressive. Garrett's answers grew increasingly erratic. His carefully constructed image was crumbling. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Sophia and I waited in a holding room, too nervous to eat or sleep. We knew they were deciding everything: our freedom, our futures, whether justice would finally be served. They returned with a mixed verdict: not guilty on the harassment charges against Garrett. The evidence supported our claims of legitimate concern, but guilty on the burglary charges. We'd broken the law to find evidence, and that couldn't be excused. As soon as the verdict was read, police officers moved toward Garrett. Based on his testimony and the journal evidence, he was being arrested for suspicion of murder. His supporters gasped as they led him away in handcuffs. The judge sentenced us to time served plus 2 years probation for the burglary. We'd avoided prison, but our nursing licenses were permanently revoked. We could never work in healthcare again. The career we'd trained for was over. Outside the courthouse, the community was divided. Medical staff rallied around Garrett, insisting he was being railroaded. But patients' families supported us, sharing their own suspicious experiences with unexpected deaths on his shifts. The FBI launched a full investigation into the hospital administrators. Garrett's arrest had shaken something loose. Financial records showed years of bribes to keep complaints quiet. Within weeks, 3 administrators were arrested. Garrett's previous hospital released a statement acknowledging concerns about his departure. 2 more families came forward with suspicious deaths. The pattern we'd suspected was finally being exposed. Sophia's infection had progressed to pneumonia during the trial. She spent a week in the hospital, the same one where this all started. Nurses who'd shunned her now had to provide her care. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My family slowly started reaching out, not to apologize, but to understand. My mother admitted she'd been scared, manipulated by the hospital's narrative. The relationship was damaged, possibly beyond repair, but at least they were listening. Mrs. Brennan's daughter visited us after Sophia was released. She thanked us for fighting when everyone else had given up. She said her mother would have been proud. Then she made an unexpected offer. She wanted to start a foundation in her mother's name, something to protect healthcare workers who reported abuse. She had her mother's life insurance money and wanted us to help run it. It wouldn't replace our nursing careers, but it was something. We found a small office space downtown. Nothing fancy, just 2 desks and a phone. We started reaching out to nurses who'd been silenced, offering support and legal resources. Word spread slowly but steadily. 3 months after that first FBI report, we sat in our tiny office planning our first fundraiser. Garrett was in prison awaiting trial for murder. Several administrators had been convicted. The hospital was under federal oversight. We'd lost everything we'd worked for: our licenses, our careers, our reputations in the medical community. The victory felt hollow when measured against the cost, but we'd stopped him from culling again. The phone rang constantly now, nurses from across the state calling with their own stories. We couldn't practice nursing anymore, but we could protect those who still did. It wasn't the life we'd planned, but it was the one we'd earned. Mrs. Brennan's photo sat on my desk, a reminder of why we'd fought. She'd died trying to protect Sophia. We'd nearly died trying to get justice. But in the end, the truth had survived. The nonprofit grew slowly. We'd never be rich or famous. Most people would never know our names. But every nurse who called our helpline, every predator we helped expose, every life we potentially saved, that was our real vindication. Justice had come at the cost of everything we'd built. But as I looked at Sophia across our cramped office, both of us forever banned from the profession we loved, I knew we'd make the same choice again. Some fights are worth losing everything for.
Ex left me at 7 months pregnant, showed up 2 years later demanding to see our son, and now his parents are guilting me. I'm confused between protecting my boy and giving him a dad. For context, around 2 years ago, I, 29F, got pregnant with my ex-boyfriend while I was living with him. My ex, let's call him Travis, and I had been together for almost 3 years when I got pregnant and had been living together for a year and a half when it happened. Travis and I had met through friends and we had a good relationship. He was sweet and charming, and we got along well. The only complaint that I had with him was perhaps that he was a bit too particular about money, and it could sometimes come off as stingy. But I didn't mind it because it helped us save money, so I didn't make a big deal out of it. And I'm sure that he could also have a lot of problems with me, but he never talked about it, so I didn't think it was necessary for me to bring it up with him. And I'm not exaggerating, but his stinginess was a bit excessive, and he was just always looking for ways to save money and cut back on costs. It wasn't a problem for me until I moved in with him, and realized that everything that he had in his house was dirt cheap and of very poor quality, be it food or toiletries, or even the furniture, which was all secondhand, and looked like it had all been through a lot. Now, before I moved in with him, I used to hang out with him in my apartment, and sometimes at his, but I never noticed all of that. But then I ended the lease agreement on my apartment, because the rent was way too high, and it was just more convenient to move in with Travis. However, after moving in with him, I began to take note of such things, and I tried to ignore them for a while, but then I couldn't keep my mouth shut for too long. So eventually, I decided to talk to him about it, and he protested at first, but I managed to wear him down and talked him into buying new things for his house. I told him that it would be like an investment and it would be good for both of us in the long run. But I promised him that we would split all the costs equally, and that seemed to pacify him, so that's what we did. Soon enough, within just 3 months of moving in with him, I had changed everything about the house, and the place looked much better after I got rid of everything that he had owned previously. I thought that I was doing him a favor, and it would be a good thing for both of us, but apparently not. I guess that was the point after which our relationship began souring a little bit, because he thought that it was quite controlling and selfish of me, even though I was just trying to improve his quality of life and it wasn't something that I was doing just for myself. So I thought it was a bit unfair for him to say things like that, and I would get really annoyed at him whenever he would say such things. But that didn't stop him from bringing it up every time we had a fight, and it was basically his trump card, because anytime we were arguing about anything, he would tell me that he had basically changed his entire lifestyle for my sake, and my comfort, and that had to shut me up. I thought it was not cool because I had also paid for the things that we had purchased, so it wasn't as if he was the one who had paid for everything, and we were also splitting the rent, so this home now belonged to both of us, and I didn't say anything wrong with trying to make it inhabitable for myself as well. But he just wasn't willing to listen to any of that, and he would just keep saying that he changed everything about his life for me, and I guess I was supposed to be grateful for that, and never fight with him because of it. We didn't break up, despite that, because I thought that we could make it work. Things had gotten a little rough after we moved together, but I just figured that they could fix it eventually, so I decided to stick by him. There was also the fact that when things were good, they were great, and I didn't want to give up on us so quickly just because of a few fights. And I'm not the kind of girl who gives up on relationships easily either, so that was that. We continued to fight and make up, but at no point did either of us entertain the idea of a breakup. I guess he wanted to make things work with me just as much as I did, but maybe it changed after the pregnancy. When I found out I was pregnant, both of us were overjoyed, and he told me that he would marry me as soon as he got the promotion that he had been working towards. I was quite happy about it because I really did want to get married to Travis. I loved him and the baby was only going to bring us closer, so we had a couple of discussions about marriage, but he never officially proposed with a ring or anything of the sort. It was all informal, but both of us had decided that it was going to happen in the long run, when the time was right. He was just waiting to get a promotion at work, and he had been putting the time in for quite a few months. Once he got a raise, we would start planning the wedding and get engaged formally. That was the plan that both of us had agreed on, and I believed that even if he didn't get the promotion, we would still get married, but that was quite stupid of me. When I was 3 months along, I decided to take a break from my job because it was just getting a little too stressful for me and I needed less of that. I am a contractor and it's a physically stressful job, to say the least, so it was getting very difficult for me and I decided to take a maternity break. Now the unfortunate thing is that I had started at the firm just a couple of months before and they don't really cover maternity leave financially for employees who have been with the company for less than a year, so I wasn't going to get paid until I went back to work. I had discussed this with Travis, and he had told me that he would handle everything, so I didn't need to worry. I told him that I would still contribute and do whatever we could, but I just wouldn't be able to split the rent because that was the biggest of my expenses, and until the baby was born, I had to take care not to spend too much money because they would also be a lot of things that I have to think about for after the baby was born. So it was decided that until I went back to work, he would be covering the rent entirely on his own, and it was fine by me. 2 months passed and things were going well. He was still hoping to get a promotion, but one day, he just came back home really upset and told me that he had been passed over and somebody else got the promotion that he had been looking forward to. To say that he was devastated would be an understatement because the next few weeks were terrible for both of us. He had started drinking and it was obvious that he was very upset about what had happened, and he was not even bothered enough to hide it. He would come back home from work and just start drinking like there was no tomorrow, and I would be on edge the entire time because I didn't want anything bad to happen to him. I tried to tell him to cut down on the alcohol, but he told me that as long as it wasn't hurting anybody, he didn't see any reason why he should stop. I was pregnant and exhausted all the time, so I didn't even have the energy to argue with him and make him see sense. Also, he was just extremely rude all the time and constantly irritable, so I didn't want to waste my time trying to talk to him. I thought he would get over it eventually, but it just kept getting worse. Around the time I was 5 months along, he started to cut down on the drinking, but he still remained quite irritable and would snap at me anytime I tried to talk to him. I still didn't break up with him, because I was still hopeful that things would work out eventually and he would snap out of whatever this phase was. Also, I was 5 months pregnant and my parents lived in another city, so if I broke up with him, I would have nowhere to go, and I didn't want to be a burden on any of my friends. I was about to have a baby with this man, so I figured that I was just going to have to suck it up for a while and then things would eventually get better. But one day, he just came back home from work, And he told me that we needed to start splitting the rent equally again because now he was not going to get paid more than what he was getting since he didn't get the promotion. He wouldn't be able to handle all the expenses on his own anymore. I was quite alarmed by that because I had already opted for a break and I was quite big by that point, so I got tired pretty easily, so it would be impossible for me to go back to work at that point. I tried to tell him that it was just 2 more months and then I would be back to work, so he could just wait it out, but he told me that he had already been waiting for a long time to tell me about this and he just couldn't anymore. He said that it was becoming very difficult for him to manage all the household expenses on his own and that he would need me to start contributing to the rent again. I thought that it was a joke or something because there was no way that he was asking a 7-month pregnant woman, carrying his baby, no less, to go back to work just so he wouldn't have to spend like $1,000 more than he usually does. I tried to tell him that he was being very unfair because we had discussed this earlier, and he had promised me that he was going to take care of it all. And I wasn't even asking him to take care of everything and pay for all the expenses, just the rent. I was still paying for my half of the groceries and the other bills, so it was not like I was depending on him entirely. But he wasn't ready to budge from what he was demanding of me, and at one point, he told me that I could either start coughing up the rent instead of making excuses, or I could leave his apartment. That was incredibly insulting to me because when we had moved together, we had thought that this was going to be our home, and even though the lease was in his name, I had always treated the apartment like our place. So for him to say that he was going to kick me out if I didn't pay rent while I was carrying his child was so crazy that I didn't even know what to say to him. I told him to calm down and think about it with a cool head, but he told me that his mind was already made, and there was nothing I could do to change it, so now, I just had to accept the facts and make my own decision. I was very upset, so I ended up yelling at him that day, and it turned into the fight of the decade. We were in a shouting match for about half an hour, and I got so tired that eventually, I decided to just give up and started packing my things. I was humiliated by how he had treated me, and yet again, he had brought up the fact that he had changed everything for me, and it was unfair of me to expect so much from him while giving him nothing in return. He actually believed that I had done nothing for him, which was more than insulting. It was devastating for me because I loved him and I just couldn't deal with the fact that he was saying such things to me. So I packed my clothes and moved in with a friend. I didn't want to be a burden on her, but I also could not tell her what had happened. So I tried to explain the situation to her without crying, but I just couldn't keep the tears in and I ended up crying harder than ever because I was emotionally destroyed after that fight. My friend, Brianna, was nice enough to tell me that I could live with her without paying rent for as long as I had to, and she was not going to let me suffer. She and I had already been roommates in college, which is how I knew her, and I knew that she was a good person, but while we were living together when I was pregnant, she really exceeded my expectations and did everything for me that even Travis wasn't. Before I moved in with her, I would have to attend all my appointments with my OB/GYN by myself because he was always too busy, but Brianna made sure that I didn't have to do any of it alone, and even when I went into labor, she was there by my side, every step of the way. She was also kind enough to allow my parents to come visit me every single day in the 2 weeks leading up to my due date, and I can't imagine anybody else opening up her home and her heart to us like that. Since then, we have been very close, and my parents refer to her as the sister that I never had. And I agree, she really is like the sister that I never had. Coming back to Travis, he was barely there for me after I left. We never formally broke up, but after I stormed out of the house that day, I waited for him to call and ask me to come back for weeks, but that call never came. Instead, he blocked me everywhere and he also blocked all of our mutual friends. I don't know why he had to take things to such an extreme, but he made it very obvious to me that he didn't want to speak to me. Even on the day that I went into labor, I couldn't reach him, so I decided to call his parents. I didn't even know if they were aware of the breakup or not because I hadn't spoken to Travis, and his parents also had not contacted me after the big fight that we had, even though before that, they had been checking up on me every other week. But I thought that they should know and maybe they would let Travis know as well, so I called them to let them know which hospital I was going to be at. I didn't say much and I didn't know what to expect, but nobody showed up from their family. On the phone call, when I was telling his mom that I was going into labor, she didn't sound like she cared, and when nobody showed up, I realized that she actually didn't. And neither did her husband, and definitely not Travis. When I gave birth to my son, the only people who were there for me were my parents and Brianna. I'm kind of grateful for it because I don't need Travis. However, that's how I feel now. Back then it was quite different. I was very disappointed that Travis hadn't shown up for the birth of his own son, but I tried to be strong because I knew that after this point, there was no going back. I knew that I was going to have to be a single mother, and it was very obvious to me that Travis couldn't give less of a crap about his child. I cried my eyes out when I got home from the hospital, but after I was done crying, I decided that I was going to speak to a lawyer and make sure that Travis gave up his rights as a parent, because if he hadn't even shown enough for the birth of his son, there was no reason he had any right to be involved in our lives anymore. I was going to take care of myself and my son all on our own. I told Brianna and my parents about my decision and they were on my side, so they decided to start speaking to lawyers who dealt in this kind of thing, and once we had decided on somebody, we had him draw up the papers, and I personally paid Travis a visit with my lawyer about a week after I had given birth to our son. Just so I could get him to sign away his rights, and that would be the end of everything. There was not much to talk about. I told him exactly what the paperwork was for, and I said that if he didn't want to be an active part of his son's life, then he had an easy out right now and he could just sign his rights away and we would be done. It was a relatively straightforward process, and soon enough, we were done. That was the last time that I saw him and it broke my heart, but I knew that it was necessary. In the long run, that's what would be the best for me and my son. I knew that Travis was flaky, and he had broken my heart by letting me down, but he was not about to do the same thing to my son. He had signed those papers and he was out as a parent. There was no more coming back from that. After that, it was just me and my son. I didn't demand child support from Travis because I didn't want anything to do with him anymore, and I knew that he was very stingy, so he would make a whole song and dance about it if I did ask for child support. So I had to work really hard to be able to support myself and my son, and yet again, Brianna was extremely supportive of me. I went back to work just a few months after my son was born, and I had to dip into my savings so that I would be able to contribute to the expenses of living with Brianna and we would be able to split everything equally. She never asked for it, but I wanted to be of use because I felt really guilty living with her for free, since she was also just an employee who got paid around the same amount that I did, and she was supporting me and my son without any complaints. My parents decided to rent out the house back in our hometown so they could move here to be closer to me. Rent was much higher around these parts, so it was a little expensive, but they managed to get an apartment close to Brianna. They asked me to come move in with them, but it was surprisingly Brianna who asked me not to, since she liked living with us and she had become attached to me and my son, so we decided to stay together. My parents would watch my son whenever Brianna and I were at work, and everything was just great. In a few months, I got so busy with work and raising my son that I completely forgot about Travis, and it really helped with the process of healing and moving on. When my son was about 8 months old, I heard from a couple of my friends that Travis was back to seeing other people, and surprisingly, it didn't even hurt me or make me feel anything. 2 years have passed since I broke up with Travis, and being a single mother has been great. It's at least better than being with somebody who doesn't love me enough and didn't even bother to be there for me and his son. I moved into my own apartment a couple of months ago, since Brianna has also started seeing somebody, and even though it was very difficult for the both of us, I'm not sure that her new boyfriend would be comfortable with this arrangement. We still live close by, and every good thing has to come to an end someday, so I moved out a few months ago. She visits me every weekend, and so does my parents, and we make it a whole thing. Life has been good, and I definitely do not miss Travis. However, about a week ago, Travis showed up at my door and said that he was ready to be out of my life again. He told me that he had asked for my address from a friend, and after a lot of deliberation and failed dates, he had realized that he had made a huge mistake, and he wanted me back. Not only that, but he also wanted a relationship with his son, and so, he was back now. I thought it was ridiculous of him to expect that I would just take him back, no questions asked, and I told him that he was no longer welcome in my life. I tried to shut the door, but he told me that he was going nowhere until he at least got a chance to see his son. He told me that it was quite unfair that I was withholding his own child from him, and he hadn't even had the opportunity to see his own son even once since he was born, and it's been 2 years, so now he deserves to meet the boy at least once. He told me that he was ready to be a father now, and if I was a good mother, then I would do what was right for my son and not try to get back at him by withholding our son from him. I thought it was laughable because, first of all, he had terminated his rights as a parent, and I had proof of it. So now, he had no right to demand to see his son because legally, he was not his father anymore. And for 2 years, he had nothing to do with us, so it was very bold of him to come back out of nowhere and expect us to be okay with it. I literally just laughed in his face and reminded him that he had signed his rights away shortly after our son was born, so now he was not our son, but he was just my son, and he needed to get out or else I would report him to the cops. Then I shut the door right in his face and ignored him as he rang the doorbell for about 5 minutes after until he finally left. But now I feel very guilty about it because I discussed it with my parents and Brianna, and while they agree that I absolutely do not need to get back with Travis, they don't know if this is the best for our son. There is also another factor, which is Travis' parents, who have been trying to talk to me ever since I drove him away. They have been crying and begging me to give Travis an opportunity to fix everything and let him have another shot at being a parent. They sent me a bunch of videos, apologizing to me for the way that they behaved with me 2 years ago and for not being there for me. They explained that they were just upset that Travis and I had broken up, and there were a lot of personal issues as well that they were dealing with, which led to making some bad decisions. But now, they were really sorry, and they had come back to their senses. They are trying to convince me that this is what's best for my son because in the long run, he'll definitely want to know about his father, and if I tell him that his father had wanted to come back, but I decided that he was not going to be a part of his life, my son is going to be very disappointed, and they are just trying to prevent it. They admit and acknowledge that Travis screwed up colossally, but as a mother, I should forgive him because my son needs him. Travis has also unblocked me and is trying to convince me of the same things. He's also trying to tell me that we actually belong together, and he knows that I'm mad right now, but I'll come around eventually and he's ready to wait for me. I just don't know what to do. I feel like this is a huge dilemma and it's driving me nuts right now. Ida for not wanting to let my ex-boyfriend, who dumped me while I was pregnant, see our son. Update 1. Hey, so I have thought about it, and I think I'm not going to let Travis back into my life again. And I'm certainly not going to allow him to have any contact with my son, at least until my son is old enough to know what happened. I'm going to tell him about his father when he's 5 years old and then he can make up his mind for himself. I know it's still young and 5 years old is not mature enough, but that's what I told Travis and he seems to be okay with it. So that's the conclusion that we have come to for now. Let's see if it sticks or not. As for everybody, in the comments, who was telling me that I was evil for not letting my son see his father, well, his father wasn't even there for me when I was giving birth to our son, so I guess we can all call it even. And I appreciate the other people, who were supportive and kind to me and didn't judge me too harshly. The rest of you really need to introspect a little. Update 2. So about 2 days have passed since I had that discussion with Travis, but his parents are not happy about it. They think that 5 years is a very long time and it's not healthy for a boy to go for that long without having any contact with his father. I think it's funny that they have a problem with it now because they didn't seem to have a problem back when I was giving birth and none of them bothered to show up. Travis told me to ignore his parents and block them if it really came down to it, but the things that they have been accusing me of are really messed up. They think that I am depriving Travis of a relationship with his son on purpose because I want to get revenge, as if I would be petty enough to withhold my son from my ex just because I wanted to make him feel bad. They think that I am selfish enough to do that because I obviously don't care about my son. I'm not saying this, they said this and I wanted to hit back at them, but I decided not to because it was obviously not worth it. His parents are old, crazy, and dramatic, and I'm not going to waste my time trying to talk sense into them. They can believe whatever they want to, I don't care about it. Update 3. Hi. So almost a month has passed since I re-established contact with Travis and we have decided that he's going to contribute to his son's expenses and try to do his best as a dad. We are still trying to build trust between the two of us because otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to co-parent. Well, I might introduce him to our son this year itself, but we are taking things slow right now. He has been quite apologetic so far and keeps telling me that he regrets everything that he did, and wants to make up for it however he can, so I'm willing to give him a chance. And I also thought about it, I've been putting myself through a lot and really pushing myself to do better for my son, but here, Travis is willingly stepping up to help me out, so I don't have any reason to reject his help. I'm going to give this a chance, no matter what, because it's for my son.